Megyn Kelly has weighed in on Meghan Markle's failed plan.
We've got to talk about Meghan Markle.
I remember when she was born, big new addition to the family, and we just have a very young sister here.
Could it be true that Meghan Markle isn't exactly the age everyone thinks she is? Or is there something deeper hiding behind that polished image? That one sharp question didn't just spark curiosity. It detonated a rumor so intense, it refuses to fade away. Because when people start digging into Meghan's story, things don't just feel off, they start to unravel fast. Her timeline doesn't flow like a normal life story. It feels edited, cut, and stitched together like a drama series with scenes missing and timelines jumping all over the place. And the wild part, the same person who speaks so loudly about being real and authentic is now being questioned over something as basic as her own timeline. No royal title, no spotlight, no carefully crafted image can fully mask details like age. Observers have pointed out that her classmates often seem older, group photos raise eyebrows, and even official records appear to have been quietly adjusted over time. That's not something people just ignore. It sticks, and every time someone looks a little closer, those small doubts turn into bigger questions. The cracks don't just stay small, they spread wider. Meanwhile, Meghan keeps smiling through it all like everything lines up perfectly. But critics aren't buying that anymore. Now here's where things get even more intense. This isn't just random gossip floating around online spaces. Some believe this entire narrative may have been shaped carefully from the very beginning. We're talking about curated records, selected images, and patterns that feel way too consistent to be accidental. Meghan built a strong personal brand. No one can deny that, but what if the base of that brand doesn't fully match the story being told? She's often seen as the Hollywood success story who stepped into royalty.
There's nothing original here.
I hope you're having the best birthday you've ever had. Thank you for everything.
Which is really such a fake. When she was younger,
Hi, Daddy. I got an English award.
100% a bully brat.
But what if that version is only part of the picture, and the rest has been rewritten behind the scenes? Things start to get really interesting when one specific photo enters the conversation. A group shot from Northwestern University's salsa club suddenly became a major talking point. At first glance, it looks harmless, just smiles, memories, and early 2000s nostalgia. But the deeper people look, the more questions start popping up. Many of the individuals in that photo are believed to have been born in the early 1970s. That would place them in their early 50s today. And right there among them is Meghan, officially born in 1981, making her noticeably younger than the rest of the group. Now think about that carefully. How does someone fit so seamlessly into a group with that kind of age difference without it raising questions? It's like someone stepping into a reunion from a completely different batch and acting like they've always been part of it. The timelines feel off. The math doesn't quite land, and the explanations, almost non-existent. To critics, that's not just a coincidence, it feels staged. That salsa club photo quickly became more than just an old memory. For some, it turned into a key piece of suspicion, a moment that doesn't align neatly with the official story. And once people notice it, it's hard to ignore. But here's where it escalates. That photo isn't the only thing people point to. When similar patterns show up repeatedly, it stops being brushed off as coincidence and starts being seen as a trend. Across alumni mentions, event records, and social circles, Meghan appears in places where people feel she doesn't quite fit the expected timeline. Everyone else seems aligned with the era, but her presence raises eyebrows again and again. It creates the impression, at least for critics,
for the longest time, she wanted to be a dancer.
Yeah, she had a very clear idea of where she wanted her path to take her.
that she's stepping across different timelines, blending in, and hoping no one questions it too deeply. And that's where the conversation starts getting louder. Some critics argue that this isn't accidental at all. They believe it shows intentional shaping of a public story. They claim it's like carefully adjusting details over time, refining an image to keep it appealing and consistent with a certain narrative. But here's the problem. In Hollywood, stories can be polished quietly. In royal circles, everything is examined closely. Every detail gets questioned. Every record gets checked. And every inconsistency becomes a talking point. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because when timelines don't align and records seem inconsistent, it builds a chain. Reaction of doubt. Instead of a smooth life story, What people see is something filled with edits, adjustments, and unanswered gaps. Then comes one of the biggest topics fueling all of this, the birth year debate. Officially, Meghan Markle's birth date is listed as August 4th, 1981. That's the widely accepted version. But over time, other years, like 1975, have been mentioned in discussions across different spaces. And that's not a small difference. That's a major shift that changes the entire narrative. If earlier dates were true, it would reshape how people view her career timeline, her rise in the spotlight, and even her transition into royal life. Instead of a younger rising actress stepping into a new world, the image becomes something more calculated and strategically presented. And here's what keeps the conversation alive. These discussions didn't just appear after she became widely known. They've been circulating for years, long before the royal spotlight came into play. From forums to alumni chatter to early gossip mentions.
Meghan Markle has nothing.
Someday Meghan's going to realize that she's obviously missing out.
I think when I was 30, if I thought about 50, I thought that is an awful long way away. And I don't really need to think about it. And then I blinked and I'm 50. That's crazy.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Questions about her timeline have been quietly present in the background. When multiple versions of the same detail appear over time, people don't just ignore it, they start asking deeper questions. Because for most people, there's only one clear birth year, not several floating around. And that's why critics keep pushing the conversation forward. But things didn't stop there, because another moment added fuel to the fire. When her son Archie was born in 2019, everything initially seemed standard and expected. The birth certificate included Meghan's full name, completely normal and routine. But then something changed, and that's when people really started paying attention. The document was officially amended not long after. Her personal names were removed and replaced with her royal title. And just like that, the questions came rushing in, because birth certificates are not casual documents. They're official, legal, and not something people expect to be changed without reason. So naturally, people started asking, why make that adjustment? For critics, it wasn't just about the document itself. It became part of a bigger pattern they believed they were seeing. If one official record could be updated like that, what else might have been adjusted over time? School details, public records, timeline information. That single change opened the door to a wave of speculation. Meghan reportedly explained that it was tied to royal protocol, but by that point the conversation had already taken off. The narrative stuck strongly. People began to feel that her public image wasn't just being presented.
So before she met Harry, you had no doubt she was your sister?
My little sister, though, I said.
August 4th, 40 years ago, Meghan was born, and she was born as a C-section, so she was put in my arm.
It was being managed carefully at every level. And once people start questioning official paperwork, trust becomes fragile. But the story doesn't end there, because the conversation goes even deeper. It moves beyond documents and timelines into something even more elusive. Photos, images that appear, disappear, and sometimes resurface at unexpected times. Some observers claim that certain images from her past are hard to find, while others suddenly show up again when discussions heat up. And that pattern raises even more curiosity, because in today's digital world, where everything is archived and saved, missing or inconsistent photo trails stand out quickly. It leads people to wonder, are these just coincidences or something more controlled? Some say it's just normal gaps in documentation. Others believe it adds another layer to the ongoing questions. Either way, it keeps the conversation alive and evolving. Because when it comes to Meghan Markle, it's not just about what's visible, it's about what feels incomplete. And sometimes, what's missing says more than what's right in front of you. That's why this story refuses to fade away. It's not built on one moment or one claim. It's built on a series of details that people continue to connect. Each photo, each record, each timeline mention, it all feeds into a bigger picture that some believe hasn't been fully explained. And as more people start looking closer, asking questions and comparing details, the mystery only grows stronger. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about age. It's about perception, identity, and how a public story is shaped over time. And when those pieces don't line up perfectly, people notice and they don't forget. That's why the conversation keeps going. That's why the questions keep coming. And that's why, when it comes to Meghan's past, the story doesn't just sit quietly. It keeps unfolding piece by piece, leaving everyone wondering what's really behind the image they've been shown. When people look at the public footprint of Meghan Markle, something immediately stands out. And it's not just her fame, it's how controlled her past appears compared to most public figures who have lived under the spotlight for years. Most people leave behind a messy, chaotic trail online. Yearbook photos, awkward college shots, random party pictures, tagged moments from friends, forgotten uploads that resurface years later without warning. But Meghan's digital history, according to critics, doesn't follow that natural pattern at all. Instead, her images seem to appear in controlled bursts, like they are being released strategically rather than discovered organically. And that alone raises questions, because in the real world, old-school photos don't suddenly drop in coordinated waves. They don't show up exactly when conversations around a person are heating up in the public space. Yet with Meghan, critics say that's exactly what seems to happen. Images resurface at moments when attention is highest, when discussions are loud, when scrutiny is intense, and that timing is what fuels suspicion, because it creates the impression that someone, somewhere, is deciding what gets seen and what stays hidden, almost like a behind-the-scenes system managing memory itself. Not a natural archive, but a controlled release of history. And once people start viewing it that way, the conversation shifts quickly, because it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like design. Critics argue that when someone's past is tightly controlled, it sends a signal, not of confidence, but of insecurity. Because if a life story is complete and consistent, there's no need to selectively release pieces of it. You would expect full transparency, a full timeline, a full archive of experiences without gaps or sudden missing years that appear suspicious in hindsight. But instead, what some observers claim they see is something different: selective exposure, carefully chosen moments, and gaps that are never fully explained. And those gaps matter more than people realize, because when parts of a personal history feel incomplete, the public doesn't just ignore them, they start filling them in. And that's where speculation begins to grow on its own. A missing year becomes a question. A questionable photo becomes a theory. A timeline inconsistency becomes a discussion that spreads far beyond its original context. And critics say Meghan's public image suffers from exactly that pattern. They argue her photo strategy, as they call it, feels overly curated, almost like a production rather than a natural life timeline. Not just controlled branding, but controlled history presentation. And every time older images resurface or disappear again, the age discussion comes back into focus. Because for some critics, everything connects back to the same central question about her timeline, especially when public attention spikes during legal or family-related controversies. Whenever Meghan steps into courtroom-related discussions or becomes involved in public legal disputes, the conversation shifts again, and suddenly old rumors reappear. Old images get analyzed again. Old timelines get questioned all over again. It becomes a repeating cycle that never fully settles. One of the most discussed examples is the defamation case involving Samantha Markle. The moment that case gained attention, online discussions reignited instantly, and with it came the return of familiar questions about credibility, about family narratives, and about inconsistencies people believe they've noticed over time. And just like that, the conversation shifts away from the legal issue itself and back into personal history speculation. Critics argue that this is where the cycle becomes self-sustaining, because every legal headline acts like fuel for older discussions that never truly disappear. Instead, they wait quietly until something triggers them again. And once they come back, they don't just return, they multiply, because online rumors don't stay still. They evolve, they spread, they pick up new layers from different people, different posts, different interpretations. One article becomes a discussion becomes a theory becomes a widely repeated idea that starts feeling like truth to casual observers. And Meghan, according to critics, sits right in the center of that cycle. because every new headline connected to her life becomes an opportunity for old narratives to resurface again. Even if the topic is unrelated, the same themes return: age, photos, timeline gaps, identity questions. And that repetition is what strengthens the perception over time. Not necessarily evidence, but repetition. And repetition online is powerful because people don't always dig deep into original sources. They react, they share, they repeat what they see others saying. And slowly, a narrative forms on its own momentum. Critics argue that Meghan's public life unintentionally feeds this process, because whenever there are unclear details or adjustments to public-facing information, or gaps in explanation, those gaps become spaces where imagination takes over, and imagination online spreads faster than clarification. That's the dangerous part. Once a rumor enters the digital ecosystem, it doesn't need confirmation to survive. It only needs engagement, and engagement keeps it alive. That's why age speculation keeps resurfacing in cycles. That's why old photos keep getting reanalyzed. That's why timelines keep being reconstructed over and over again by different voices online. And over time, perception starts to override detail. People begin to remember narratives they've only seen repeated, not verified. And critics argue that this is where Meghan's public image becomes difficult to separate from online interpretation, because she is constantly surrounded by evolving stories that continue to reshape how people perceive her past. At this point, the discussion shifts into a hypothetical scenario that critics often raise, not as fact, but as speculation. What if the alternative birth years circulating online had any truth to them? What if there were actual discrepancies in the official timeline? Because if that were the case, the implications would be significant. It wouldn't just change perception, it would completely reframe her public biography. It would suggest missing years, rewritten timelines, a carefully constructed public identity that doesn't fully match private history. And critics argue that even the idea of that possibility is what keeps the conversation alive, because once doubt enters public perception, it rarely leaves completely. It just changes shape over time. If Meghan's age were different than what is officially stated, critics say it would alter how people view her entire career trajectory, her rise in Hollywood, her transition into global recognition, and her entry into royal life. Everything would be interpreted differently, not necessarily because of confirmed fact, but because of how narratives would shift around that idea. And this is where the discussion becomes more intense, because marrying into royalty places a person under a level of scrutiny most celebrities never experience. Royal institutions are built on documentation, structure, and historical consistency. So critics argue that if any inconsistency existed, it would become especially noticeable in that environment. And that's why the conversation continues to circle back again and again, because every new public moment connected to Meghan seems to pull old discussions back into view. It creates a loop. Old photos resurface, old claims reappear, old debates restart, and each cycle reinforces the previous one, until it becomes difficult for the average observer to separate original sources from repeated commentary. And that is where perception becomes powerful on its own. Because in modern media, perception often spreads faster than verification, and once something becomes widely repeated, it begins to feel established, even if it's still part of ongoing debate. That's the core of the controversy surrounding Meghan's online narrative. Not a single claim, but a continuous pattern of resurfacing questions that never fully disappear. And critics say that as long as gaps, edits, and inconsistencies are perceived, even if unverified, the conversation will continue to evolve on its own, because narratives like this don't end cleanly online. They expand, they branch out, they fuel more speculation, and they keep drawing new audiences into the discussion every time they resurface. And so the cycle continues. Photo after photo, claim after claim, discussion after discussion, until everything becomes part of a larger, ongoing digital story that never fully closes. And that's exactly why the conversation refuses to settle. Because as long as new content appears, old questions return. And as long as old questions return, the debate continues to grow. And right at the centre of it all remains Meghan Markle's public image, constantly analysed, constantly interpreted, and constantly reinterpreted through every new wave of attention. And if there's one thing this entire discussion shows, it's that once a narrative takes hold online, it doesn't just stay still. It evolves endlessly, shaped by every new reaction, every resurfaced image, and every repeated claim that keeps it alive. And as this conversation continues to unfold, one thing becomes clear. The story doesn't end here. It only keeps getting retold in different ways, by different voices, across different moments in time. And if you're still following this, make sure you stay connected, because there's always another layer waiting right beneath the surface.